What did the Rabshakeh say to Hezekiah in order to try and get him to surrender? This is a question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Kings on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 17 to 25. Before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 17. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Kings chapter 18, beginning at verse 17. Then the king of Assyria sent the Tartan, the Rabsaris, and the Rabshakeh from Lachish with a great army against Jerusalem to King Hezekiah. And they went up and came to Jerusalem. When they had come up, they went and stood by the aqueduct from the upper pool, which was on the highway to the fuller's field. And when they had called to the king, Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder came out to them. Then the Rabshakeh said to them, Say now to Hezekiah, Thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, What confidence is this in which you trust? You speak of having plans and power for war, but they are mere words. And in whom do you trust that you rebel against me? Now look, you are trusting in the staff of this broken reed, Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh king of Egypt to all who trust in him. But if you say to me, We trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and said to Judah and Jerusalem, You shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Now therefore I urge you, give a pledge to my master the king of Assyria, and I will give you 2,000 horses, if you are able on your part to put riders on them. How then will you repel one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put your trust in Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Have I now come up with the Lord against this place, without the Lord against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, Go up against this land and destroy it. In our last lesson, we talked about how Hezekiah at one time or another had rebelled against the king of Assyria and didn't pay the tribute that began under Ahaz. So Sennacherib, who by then was now king of Assyria, had come down in order to defeat Judah and restore his control over the now rebellious nation. This event is not only recorded for us in the Bible, but also in the Sennacherib prison, copies of which can be found in the British Museum in London, the Oriental Institute of Chicago, and the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem. The dating of what we have covered in the last lesson, up through verse 16, took place in about 701 BC, as this was the 4th year of the reign of Sennacherib, as described in the prison. In the prison, Sennacherib describes his attack on Judah, the fact that Hezekiah sent him tribute, and it refers to Hezekiah as a caged bird in Jerusalem, even though Assyria doesn't take Jerusalem. Testament to the fact of Assyria's dominance in these battles. This agrees with the biblical account. The prism also speaks of people from Judah that he took captive, something that the Bible is silent upon. What the prism leaves out is Sennacherib's defeat that we will read of in chapter 19, a defeat where his army suffered great losses. Now, some surmise that the Bible made this part up, or at least largely exaggerated it, since Sennacherib will go only on more campaigns after the one mentioned in the prism that took place in Judah. Others correctly point out that major losses by the kings of that time are rarely memorialized, for that would show weakness. However, there is another option as to why Sennacherib's prison was silent on his defeat in 701 BC. It's because there wasn't one on that campaign. Rather, the events of chapters 18, beginning at verse 17, through the end of chapter 19, refer to a second campaign, one that did go unmentioned because of Sennacherib's defeat. Is this view supported in the text? Yes, but not only here in 2 Kings, but in 2 other places where this event is recorded, namely 2 Chronicles 32 and Isaiah 36 and 37. In 2 Chronicles 32, we find that Hezekiah built up the walls in Jerusalem that had been broken down in anticipation of Sennacherib's attack, something that he would not have had enough time to do once Sennacherib got down to Judah in 701 BC. This points to a break in time between verses 16 and 17. We also see in the Rabshakeh's comments here in 2 Kings and in Isaiah that Hezekiah had evidently put his trust in Egypt to help him. Now, when would Hezekiah had time to do this after Sennacherib came down and began to attack Judah in 701 BC? Isaiah had warned Hezekiah against placing his trust in Egypt, but Hezekiah didn't heed those warnings. Again, this points to a break in time between verses 16 and 17. And then, of course, you have Hezekiah sending tribute to Sennacherib here in verse 14, but then utterly defeating him through the power of God in chapter 19 in the supposed same siege. How would Hezekiah have had time to procure all this tribute, send it to Sennacherib, which he tells us he got in the Sennacherib prison, only then to defeat him in the very same siege? This doesn't make sense. However, if we consider a break in time of about 3 years to about 698 BC, the final year of the reign of Hezekiah, that would give Hezekiah enough time to shore up the walls of Jerusalem, ask for the help of Egypt, and then rebel against Sennacherib again, leading him to come down and deal with Hezekiah again. They came down the same way that they did 3 years previously, dealing with Lachish again. But this time Sennacherib did not want to only cage Hezekiah like a bird in Jerusalem. He sought to besiege the city and destroy it. Before doing so, he sent the Tartan, who was the commander-in-chief, the Rabshakeh, who was the chief eunuch, and the Rabshakeh, who was the chief cupbearer, with a message that would first be received by Hezekiah's servants: surrender, for fighting is futile. The Rabshakeh, who seems to be the main speaker here, mocks Hezekiah for placing his trust in Egypt to help him, for the Assyrians view the Egyptians as a broken reed, one who can easily be defeated by his forces. The Rabshakeh then goes on to mock Hezekiah if Hezekiah said that he trusted in his God to save him. For how can this be, since Hezekiah has destroyed all this God's high places, saying only worship in Jerusalem? Now, of course, the Assyrians had no concept that this is what God wanted, for they were idolaters, but to them Hezekiah's actions against the high places were the reason that the Assyrians could come into Judah and conquer it so easily. And then, to add insult to injury, the Rabshakeh mocked Hezekiah further by saying that if Hezekiah could find 2,000 men to come and fight, that the Rabshakeh would provide them with 2,000 horses. But in reality, the Rabshakeh believed that Hezekiah would not be able to do that. And if this truly was the case, how could Hezekiah expect to be able to defeat the Assyrian army, even with the weak Egyptians' help? And to make matters worse, the Rabshakeh said that even if Hezekiah could muster up a force, the Lord had sent him to destroy the land, so all resistance was futile anyway. It was better to surrender immediately. Now, of course, many wonder what the Rabshakeh was saying here, for we know that the Lord gave him no such command. But what is likely happening is that the Rabshakeh is engaging in psychological warfare, lying to the enemy in order to strike fear into their hearts. For after all, who could withstand Jehovah? Now, the Rabshakeh didn't believe in Jehovah, but Hezekiah did, and so perhaps saying such a thing would frighten him enough to surrender. The Rabshakeh is not done, though, and so we'll continue with his speech, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 26 to 37, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.